This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
In today's spoiler alert, we look at the movie Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, about the most significant times in the life of theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, is a 2023 biographical drama based on the 2005 biography American Prometheus and Martin J. Sherwin. The film stars Cillian Murphy in the titular role, Robert Downey Jr. as ally-turned-rival Levi Strauss, and Emily Blunt as spouse Kitty Oppenheimer. Off an estimated $100 million budget, it has grossed over $412 million at the box office worldwide as of this recording.
During World War II, Lieutenant General Leslie Groves Jr. appoints physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer to work on the top-secret Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer and a team of scientists spend years developing and designing the atomic bomb. Their work comes to fruition on July 16, 1945, as they witness the world's first nuclear explosion, forever changing the course of history. So I want to introduce our special guest, John Rodriguez from Hidden History. Hey, John.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks for
excited. So we are going to be nerding out on some history today. We saw this movie, we loved the movie, and then we had a bunch of historical questions. It felt really appropriate to bring you on board to have this discussion, but also to pick your brain. Tell us a little bit about you, John, and your podcast.
Okay. Again, thank you for having me, guys. It's an honor. And basically, I run a podcast called Hidden History and Odyssey Through Time. Where I focus on historical figures that have been lost in history that their stories deserve to be told. Right now, I'm wrapping up season 2 that I was focused on the Holocaust, victims and heroes of the Holocaust. That's what I've been working on. And I run my Instagram account as well. I post pictures and reels there. So that's my secondary thing to the podcast. I'm just trying to bring certain topics and people in history to the light so that people today can just realize that these people existed because they deserve to be, recognized.
That's
Absolutely.
Great.
Especially because there are so many people in history that, like women, people of color, just a bunch of people that have contributed to our history who we had no idea about.
Yeah, it's a lot. With my first season when I covered U.S. historical figures, there, I was trying to, ratio it out. So, I had enough men, enough women. I had to ratio, make sure I had, people of color, because people are just picky in the world. So I didn't want people to say, oh, you did too many men or you did too many women. So I try to include everybody. And some of the women's stories I read and did episodes on, they're very, very interesting women. Just going back to World War I and World War II. And these are times that you don't imagine women doing much in that era, but they did. A lot of people don't understand they did. And it's very interesting and just to highlight those people and those certain things that are in danger of being forgotten or have been forgotten.
John had a recent episode about Anne Frank's father that was absolutely fascinating, and I didn't know anything about the guy. But that was a great episode, John.
See, with that episode, I didn't want to do Anne Frank because everyone knows that story. So I said, let me do her father. And that's where I went with it. But I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to check that out. So you saw the movie, we saw the movie, and right off the bat, how did people feel about it?
From what I heard, I heard overall, before I watched it, I heard people loved it. People were raving about it. That and Barbie have been in the headlines. I'm not going to watch Barbie, but I will watch, and I did watch Oppenheimer. So I heard great things about it before I watched it. And then I was just worried as a historian about inaccuracies or misrepresentations, because that's happened a lot in Hollywood, especially in recent years. Portrayals and such, it's just, for whatever reason, things are being twisted. So I'm always skeptical, but then I watched this movie yesterday actually, and I was impressed. It was like when I watched All Quiet on the Western Front. I was worried at first, but then I watched it. I'm like, pretty good, very good. I enjoyed it.
I didn't like the movie as much as the book, but I did really appreciate seeing a lot of that trench warfare. We have an episode on All Quiet.
Yeah, it's called turmeric teeth because everybody's teeth are super yellow. And I'm obsessed with teeth. It's like the first thing I look at when I look at a face. It's like, the smile tells you a lot about a person, whether they brush their mouth or not.
That's very true. That's very true, yes. Just on All Quiet on the Western Front, how you mentioned it was a book first. This movie, Oppenheimer, was as well. I didn't get to read either book before seeing the movies, but I was happy with both movies. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, for Oppenheimer, the physical appearance, because they show the picture of the real Oppenheimer, J. Robert Oppenheimer, and then they show Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer, not quite side by side, but one after another. And the appearance looked really close, like about as close as you can expect for a film adaptation. And I had heard that Cillian Murphy was actually passing out between takes because he was eating like an almond a day or some ridiculously low quantity of food in order to have his appearance be so gaunt and drawn like the real Oppenheimer. That made me wonder, was that just the build of the real Oppenheimer, or was he known to be frail?
Yeah, when I started watching the movie, especially the beginning scene, and they showed him younger, it made me think of, I recently posted a picture on Instagram of Oppenheimer in the 1930s out in New Mexico, and he had that slim look, and I thought, what's his name? Cillian Murphy?
Cillian.
I thought they did great casting him, and that look, even though, an almond a day to get these actors do what they have to do, but yes, Oppenheimer, he did get the look down right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's too bad he couldn't splurge and eat 2 almonds a day. Seems like he just wouldn't have gotten to that goal.
He would have been fat.
I get it. Women struggle with bodies all the time. I feel your pain, Cillian. But I love him. I think he's actually an awesome actor. Have loved him since 28 Days Later. He's been in shows like Peaky Blinders. He was also the Scarecrow in Batman Begins. And he's a stellar actor. I was very excited for him to get a lead role. I feel like there's definitely going to be some talk of Academy Award nominations around this movie.
Absolutely. And I think visual effects is one where you might see them get a nomination, in part because of the atomic bomb explosion. But also, I really liked the visual depiction of Oppenheimer kind of piecing together the mysteries of the atom, and it's not clear what he's seeing at first or what's being flashed over parts of the screen. And then as time goes on in the early stages of the movie, it becomes clear that part of what you're seeing is the electron cloud that is circling around the nucleus. He's trying to figure out how they're going to split a thing that they've never actually even seen. And that's where a theoretical physicist's work comes into play. Mm-hmm. What did you think of the visual effects, John?
The visual effects were fascinating. Not only the ones that you mentioned, because I was waiting to see if you mentioned the one I'm about to, but those effects were amazing. And to add to those effects, the scene where Oppenheimer goes up, the bomb was dropped, and the audience is there cheering for him. Then he sees them start to, peel away as if they were in the blast. But the visual effects in that movie were overall great. Sometimes I was like, do we need this? Then I realized we do. This is it just adds to it. It adds to the mystique of not only this unknown new science, the fact that we're in this, what we thought was this tight neck race with the Germans. Who's going to make this first? And these visuals always help with tense situations like that.
Of course.
I liked a lot about the sort of the abstract visual images that we were seeing, because I felt like it was telling us, the audience, that this person lives in another universe, kind of like Albert Einstein, who's also featured in this movie. These people are so preoccupied 24/7 and even in their sleep with how the bigger picture works. And here he's thinking bigger picture, black holes in space and all that stuff, but he's also thinking about quantum physics. And he is so preoccupied with with that he is haunted almost, right? And he's living almost on a different frequency than all of us. He's preoccupied all the time with these abstract ideas because these are not things that we can see and witness. And so he's a theory man. Eventually he becomes a theory man, and he's just constantly brooding over this stuff. And I thought that the audio also really lent to this. There was a lot of warped sounds when there were like strings and electrons and things dancing around. And I felt like the heaviness of what he was thinking about.
There was one moment where the sound stuck out to me more than all the others, and it was the fake out, because it was the silent explosion at the Trinity test. And then all of a sudden, the sound of the explosion comes through. And I thought that was a really interesting choice, because for those people watching it for the first time, that explosion, the moment of that explosion was likely much larger than any of them were expecting. And so this gave the audience, who by this time is very, very familiar with the videos of the explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and maybe even the Trinity test itself, it gave us, the audience, that moment of surprise, that moment, because it made me jump. I mean, our movie theater is particularly loud.
Yeah, they have, I think, the Atmos audio setup, so we even got the rumble below our seats.
Okay.
And so
the full experience.
The full experience.
Yeah.
And we were pretty up close. So like all of the sounds leading up to that and the soundtrack were stellar, but we were also physically experiencing things. And and when that bomb hit and that delay was there, I was like, yeah, but where's the sound? Because a big explosion like that would inevitably come with a huge sound. And when it did, we almost like flew out of the theater.
It was so immersive. I have radiation poisoning now.
We'll never know what it felt like to be at that site. When that bomb goes off, the sound is sucked out of the air. And it's like, but it's great that you were able to have that experience, because it helps you understand the history more, which for me is the important thing.
Of course. Now, something that is decidedly not historically based is something that pleased me, which was the absence or apparent absence of de-aging. We've seen in a number of movies as of late, including
Indiana Jones,
that this de-aging CGI has been used a lot very recently, I would say within the past 3-4 years.
Yeah.
And
used and abused, really.
Yeah, and I think the technology is still too much in its infancy to be good enough to appear in a big budget movie like this. So I was very happy to see Robert Downey Jr. looking old, because he's kind of old now.
Yes, which is sad, and because it makes me feel old. But it took me actually a minute to actually say, that's Robert Downey Jr. And I told him, I can't believe that's Robert Downey Jr.
And I had no idea.
And he was like, he didn't hear me. And then he looks at me and 2 minutes later and goes, that's Robert Downey Jr.
Getting to more historically based topics, there was a scene with Oppenheimer meeting with Truman. There was a remark about Oppenheimer being a crybaby. What was your feeling from a historical perspective about this meeting?
So just before you answer, John, to give a little context, this is after the bombs have been dropped. And everybody is celebrating Oppenheimer, telling him he's amazing. But Oppenheimer's having almost like cold feet. Like suddenly he's realized the gravity of what he's done in this scene. And when he's with Truman, Truman's just like, hey, you cowboy. Like he's got that attitude, right? And Oppenheimer is like trying to restrain America and taking an opportunity to talk to the president here to be like, hey, we need to be very careful about how we use this technology. And, I'm having regrets here. And so Truman is kind of like disgusted by his empathy.
That scene was funny to me because right away I'm like, this is dramatized for the movie because Truman wasn't that tough. And Truman wasn't a tough guy. So it was Gary Oldman, obviously, portrayal of Truman, and they went with that route. I think they were just aiming really to dismiss Oppenheimer's, relevant claims that once you make one bomb, that's it. And we've seen literally what's happened since 1945, the development of weapons. So it's like he was making legitimate claims and people they just didn't want to hear it at the time. They just, the crybaby thing, the line at the end as Oppenheimer walks out the door, it didn't happen that way. He didn't make that remark, but Oppenheimer never overheard it. He also makes the remark about blood on his hands, which he did make to Oppenheimer after Oppenheimer, expressed his feelings. It was just that scene, I guess, that really stood out for me because I guess I know enough about Truman to know in real life that he wasn't some tough guy like that. And Gary Oldman was as Truman would have been nice as in real life, but other than that, it was it's well known that Truman and Oppenheimer in real life had their issues because of like the movie portrayed the nuclear situation, the issue. But like I said, we know that Oppenheimer was correct that we need some because what happens when a terrorist group gets these weapons?
Well, it's not only that, but the development of the bomb as I know it. I mean, those that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were tiny compared to today's atomic weapons. They make those look like kids' toys, which is really horrifying.
Yeah. And I thought the portrayal of Truman reminded me more of what I've heard of Johnson. That Johnson was notoriously brash, especially behind closed doors. That this seemed more like they were doing Johnson doing Truman instead of doing Truman.
You're 100% right. If that was going to be anyone, that would have been Johnson for sure. Not to say Truman was, a punk in real life or anything like that, but he was not that aggressive, that bold to... Imagine if he really said that to his face, you little crybaby, don't come back into my office. The president of the United States, having no appreciation for this man who led this project that made it possible to drop the bomb. Yes, the president makes the ultimate decision, but you need a team to build these things, and Oppenheimer did it. They kept accusing him of this, that, and the third, but they still needed him to build the bomb.
Yeah, and I don't know, for me, it felt like they borrowed sentiment from today's political climate. It felt like this is like the voice of, not extreme, but like more right-wing Republican for me. It just had that feeling of like, man up, be tough, and like not really being thoughtful of all of these other things and of the science.
Yeah.
Now, what about New Mexico? Because that was where the Manhattan Project was taking place. Was that Los Alamos?
That was in Los Alamos, yes. They show it in the movie. When they select the location based on the different labs throughout the countries, and the point makes sense for New Mexico, but. In general, Oppenheimer just loved New Mexico. He loved being out in the desert. When he was younger, he almost died from dysentery. And at the time, doctors would say, go out to middle of nowhere, get some fresh air. So he was sent out to New Mexico to a ranch, and he recovered from dysentery. And after that, he just fell in love with it. They show you a little bit, I believe, in the movie, his New Mexico, different little flashbacks, I believe, of him in New Mexico. But he loved it, and it seemed like it was appropriate that ultimately that this project ended up in New Mexico.
Isn't dysentery like really kind of a condition you get usually like during warfare? Because I know that was like a big thing during like Vietnam War and then those trench wars. And so like it surprises me that he would be suffering from that kind of chronically.
Well, at this time when he got it, it was still the early 1920s. So, and dysentery, you can get it just simply from dirty water. If a rat or mice, fecal matter in water and it somehow gets into your drinking supply, it's that simple. And then there are the levels such as getting it in war, which is what many people died of, for example, in the American Civil War, of dysentery. But in his case, it was near fatal, but it obviously wasn't anything war related. They don't say. I haven't really seen how he got it, but I would think he probably just had a really bad infection or something that led to it.
Go take a vacation, essentially, his doctor said.
Get some fresh air, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Fresh air,
I mean,
wow.
dysentery was always what killed me in the Oregon Trail.
I could just visualize the prescription note, get fresh air.
Yeah, fresh air west of the Mississippi. Take about a week.
Wow.
Wow. No wonder he was so skinny.
Right? Yeah, he never fully kicked dysentery.
It's the best diet, dysentery.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the greatest scenes of the movie, I love courtroom drama. As far as like different genres of movie, courtroom drama is way up top for me. And so Oppenheimer, he wasn't in court, but it was like a hearing for renewing his security credentials. And it was being conducted like it was a trial. And every time they tried to defend him, they're like, it's not a trial. It's not a trial. But they got a prosecutor to question him and lead this not a trial. And I just thought it was scattered. That scene took place over the course of days or maybe even weeks. But it was day in and day out, so this didn't take place at one moment in the film. But all put together, I just thought this was a really riveting and at times heart-wrenching exchange between the different parties at this hearing.
Very exposing for Oppenheimer because he's putting his private business out there.
Yeah.
And it feels like in the movie that they were implying that they were going to like sort of select this little remote area to unsettle him. Like this like middle of nowhere conference room in like a really depressing corner of America, you know, where it was going to just make him feel uncomfortable as possible.
So how did this play out historically?
I hated those scenes and, him dealing with that because it was a witch hunt. Historically and in the movie, it was a witch hunt. We were going through a time in our country where communism, which is a bad thing, it was the Red Scare, and some people were being blamed for being a communist that didn't deserve it. Lucille Ball was blamed as a communist until she testified and had to explain why she was registered. We were afraid of communism. That was the new enemy. And historically, it was all about his security clearance. This happened in 1954. It was something that was coming. From 1945 to 1954, Oppenheimer, he basically became, not only became super famous as the father of the atomic bomb, landing on Time magazine, but he became very vocal on how he felt about the nuclear arsenal, which was against the government of the United States at that time. And the U.S. government wasn't having it. And eventually, we ended up in 1954 in those hearings, and he lost his security clearance at the end of that. And after that, he just stayed to himself a lot more. But yes, he did have communist ties. Those are established. His mistress, his brother was a communist member. So it's like, yes, just because he was sympathetic to a cause, it's like if you're really sympathetic where you kind of call yourself a communist, that's the problem. But if you're sympathetic, you just listen to what they say and you just like, okay, it's not for me, but cool. He shouldn't have been prosecuted for that, but that's basically what it became at the end of the day.
It just kind of felt like in those days that it was really just a device to use against you if you were wrapped up in that. I mean, there were people that were blacklisted, for having those associations, but it also seemed like convenient at times to point to this particular affiliation and then say, but see, he's betraying his country, because they want to silence him and they want to discredit him to the American public who were pretty impressed with what he had done.
Like you said, the American public, the public loved this man. For overall, the public loved him. Those who approved of the droppings of the bombs. And when someone approves of you and loves you so much, you have influence and a voice. And that's what they were worried about. Just like today, they use certain things in politics against certain people. It was the same way back then as well. Politics has just been dirty since as far back as I've studied so far.
Yeah, that seems to be a running theme history-wide.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that stood out as to me, and I think to Elle as well, was Kitty Oppenheimer, played by Emily Blunt. During that hearing, when she was called upon to be questioned, she had a moment of almost flubbing and catching her bearings, and then from there on out, she was running that show.
I want to say something about this because, yeah, she was kind of a badass. She had like a real steel in her back, like from the beginning of her role. Like, I liked how matter of fact she was. It looked like at one point she might have been dealing with what looked like postpartum depression after she had her child, and she didn't really seem to be well for a little while. But through the movie, this woman was very steely. What I loved about that scene so much is that she was using the expectations against the prosecutor of being a woman at that time. They thought that if they put a little bit of pressure on her, she was going to cry and she was going to be like so sad and so scared and this. And she started to do that. And I started to feel such disappointment, like flood me when I started to see that scene. And then she looks at him like suddenly like with that cat look, right? Like now she sees a mouse to play with, and then she dominates that scene, makes him trip up on his words, makes him second guess his thoughts, and I was like, I heart her so much.
So was the real Kitty Oppenheimer that legendarily badass?
She was. I don't think they focused on it much in the movie, but she was, I believe, a biochemist. So in her own rights, she had, she was a smart woman.
Damn.
I don't know a lot about her. I do know that she always did encourage Oppenheimer to speak up, which you see a little bit in the movie. A few times you see her trying to push him and to stop being basically a pussy and just do what you have to do. She was like that, yes. But she had issues, a lot of issues, especially with the fact Oppenheimer had his mistress and, the emotional toll of all that, him becoming a celebrity. By 1945, she was an alcoholic, or borderline at least. She had a lot of alcohol-related falls after that. I do know that they stayed together till he died in 1967. So overall, yeah, she was that badass that you saw in the movie, and you did see actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, you did see her drink a few times, which is I'm glad they included that. Keep it nice and accurate, which is not a bad thing. It gave her edge that he needed, and it helped him. And so yes, overall, she was a badass. Yes.
That is so pleasing to hear.
Yeah, it is, because it was such a satisfying moment to see that, like you said. It was such a witch hunt, and it felt like at times you didn't really know who was Oppenheimer's ally, because there were people there that were, saying they had his back. And then you find out towards the end of the movie, the senator himself, right? Robert Downey Jr. Strauss was the one that actually coordinated this whole thing to happen. And then he was acting like he was telling Oppenheimer, I've got your back, we're gonna appeal, we're gonna fight this and all this stuff, when he was the one pulling the strings. So that was kind of disheartening. So it was great when that scene before Kitty goes up to speak at this hearing, like they were afraid that she was running late, but Oppenheimer was cool. He was just like, she'll be on time. I'm not even worried about her. He knew that she had his back, and she definitely came through for him, I thought.
To add to Kitty's whole scene with the congressional, or whatever the hell meeting committee that they were investigating.
The bullshit meeting, we'll call it.
I also enjoyed the bullshit meeting. Is perfect, because it really was. And he even orchestrated that way. The little room, uncomfortable. But Matt Damon, when he at the end also testified, and at first he said he would not give him clearance according to the laws of the day that he was being testified. But then, for when further questioned, I loved how he said, but he believed that Oppenheimer was loyal to America.
Yeah.
That's what he left them with. And that was the most important thing right there. Screw security clearance, because this guy's going to go by the book. He's a general.
And he said that he wouldn't give clearance to anybody, according to today's standards.
So I expect that. What I want to hear from a general like that is, do you think I'm a loyal American to this country, the United States? Do you think I would betray this country? And the general had his back in that moment, and I was like, yes.
Yeah, that was great. I really did enjoy Matt Damon's performance. I didn't even put him on my list of people. Honestly, it was a star-studded cast.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it seems like every 5-10 minutes somebody pops up and we're like, oh, look who that is.
Yeah, and when I saw him, I couldn't help it. In my head, I was like, Matt Damon.
You want one cast member that I thought didn't fit their character at all?
Yeah.
Do you remember Casey Affleck's character?
Yes.
In real life, the guy's much uglier. Nothing like the guy at all. Everyone else, in some way, looked like their real counterpart, and I'm iffy about that. So I looked into it. Casey's character, the real life character, was an ugly older man. Like, they just wanted to go with Casey, I guess.
I
have a question for you, though, because I like Casey Affleck in a lot of movies because he's got this sort of sociopathic vibration to him. When he's in a movie, I suddenly feel very uneasy. Like, he's got that insecure psycho kind of vibe about him. And that's what I was getting in this role. And I was feeling like I needed to move in my chair because I was like, this guy looks like he will eat your innards. Like,
which is why I was going to add that he was perfect for the role because this character, the character's role was accurate. It just was the portrayals. And because I'm thinking of everyone else that I'm thinking of had resemblance, but just Casey and the real life, his character, just nothing at all. But everything you just said is the reason why he probably was, cast.
Okay, well then that makes me feel very
he
satisfied.
Was perfect for the role.
Because
it's just not looks, but the character, yes.
Okay.
Well, we touched on Oppenheimer's womanizing, which was brought up at his security clearance hearing. How much of that is historical fact?
All of it's fact, except for the end. They kind of push it at the end when she kills herself that it was because of Oppenheimer.
You mean
and
Jean?
We don't really have solid. We can assume a lot of things, but they tie it to historically that she was suffering for a long time with depression. And I guess it could have been Oppenheimer leaving her and other things and her depression and her demons, which led to her suicide. But he did cheat on her. She was a member of the Communist USA Party, which is one of the reasons they came after him. But that was known. This is
Jean Tatlock that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she seemed mentally unstable, beyond mere anxiety/depression.
I would definitely say that I got the impression that she had a personality disorder. So I have a mental health background, and there were just some telling signs about their relationship. It seemed a little needy sometimes. It started out with him giving her the flowers and she's acting all unimpressed and all that stuff. But right from the beginning, especially in this era, it's really interesting that she hops right into bed with him really quick. That can sometimes be, and not always, but this can sometimes be a factor of somebody with borderline personality disorder. If they've had a history of sexual abuse, sometimes they will be very quick to hop into bed with somebody, but I'm not saying that this is the case with her. I think this is just one factor. Then she starts to have very unrealistic expectations. The moment that he says that he is starting to have a commitment with somebody else is when you start to see her freak flag fly a little bit. Once she sees that, then it's like, but what do you mean? Are we not going to see each other anymore? Are you going to go away forever? And it's suddenly like she's needy now in the relationship. And so there's this weird push and pull like with them. And then at one point during his marriage, they connect, they have sex, and she's wanting him to release information about the work that he does. And I thought that this was really inappropriate. They're here together to have sex and to, explore each other's bodies and whatnot. But then she's just like really mad that he won't give up the goods about what's going on at the job. And he's like, I can't talk to you about this stuff. And I think that she feels like a certain level of entitlement to that information, which I just thought was very bizarre because, he's working on literally top security stuff here.
I think you summed it up very well about her. And to add one thing to everything you said about her, she was actually a psychiatrist professionally.
How interesting.
I don't remember if they ever mention it in the movie or not, because I sometimes blend movies with the historical facts. But she was a psychiatrist in her early years. And it must have been early. She must have still been because she died at the age of 29, which would explain how she could meet someone like Oppenheimer through, her field of work. But she was everything you said and more. And that was their relationship in a nutshell. It was this whirlwind relationship that really, it just put this stain on his reputation later on with the communist stuff.
And his wife seemed very cavalier about her presence, almost like she expected it. In the hearing, when she finds out that they had met and that she was requesting information and he didn't really give it, she was more mad that this information was now public. But it didn't seem like she was mad at the fundamental cheating of it all. So you're saying that she actually was.
Was Kitty upset?
Sure. I think at that time as well, she knew. She women know. She knew about that they were involved before they got married. He was involved with her before he married his wife, Kitty. Then during his marriage with Kitty, he returned to her. And that the wife knew. And because Oppenheimer was also very honest, as honest as he could be. Excluding his work, he felt guilt. He was, at the end of the day, it was, so she knew, and he even says it to her after the committee, but you knew, because he tells her everything, but obviously she was a little bit more annoyed at, because
the dirty laundry was out in the air, and it was their dirty laundry, and she was really resentful of that.
It's like she has to deal with that. She's going to deal with it. She wants to deal with it at home. And obviously, behind closed doors, as all of us would want to. And because of his status, it's dirty laundry. And, it's out there. It's not just your town or your city or your friends knowing. It's like the world knows.
It's on the internet forever.
But yeah, their version of the internet, which would be newspapers and radio broadcasts, I guess. It just... everything was just tough with them.
My interpretation aside, and I can be wrong. I'm not, I wasn't there. I didn't know this person. I just saw what I was seeing in this movie. Like, I just got that vibe. And, she was also highly suicidal. Obviously, she committed the act. There was some mood issues there. There was, it just kind of made the case that she seemed to have perhaps like these really unstable relationships. That's the impression I got. But aside from that impression, I have to say that I love the casting of the women in this movie. There were not many. And so when they were present on the screen, I really almost kind of respected Oppenheimer more for picking really strong, badass women to be by his side, mistress or not. It says a lot to me about his security, about his manhood, really. You know what I mean? Yeah. That he could surround himself with strong women and prefer that.
I don't know if he thought this way, but he knew that he was smart. He knew that he would be on a road. Even when he was in university in England, he wasn't enough. He had to go to Germany. He went to Germany. It wasn't enough. He was always expanding. So he was a smart man, and he always wanted to surround himself with the best. You saw that with his team. Those men that you saw, which I wish they got more screen time, honestly, but the movie was long enough, but they did deserve a lot more screen time. But his team carefully picked, as you saw. And so it would make sense that the women would be carefully picked as well. Strong women who are going to add something to him.
Successful and smart.
World.
Yeah, biochem is no joke.
No, psychiatry, very difficult.
So him picking his team is a great entry point into the Manhattan Project. You had all these ridiculously talented and intelligent people involved in the Manhattan Project that was tasked to harness the splitting of the atom for the purposes of making a weapon, the atomic bomb. And there's one notable absence, a theoretical physicist in this project. And he was in the country, but Einstein was not in the Manhattan Project. And he was in the movie. So what explains Einstein not being involved in this thing that would have been perfect for him?
Einstein was not involved with the project, simply put, because his security clearance was not approved. Not only was he already a celebrity at the time, but he had a lot of what they called left-leaning politically. And at that time, it was not viewed as a good thing. So that whole combination, not to mention he was from Germany, which is not to say we didn't have any German scientists on our teams at all, but they could use that. That's another thing they just used against him. But it was really basically his high profile and his political leanings. It always goes back to politics at the end of the day, because you know that if he had been on the team, it would have advanced their, project. But Einstein was one of the first in this country, to say, to warn of this problem. So maybe that's another reason, potentially, that my own belief that because he made a warning of this nuclear arms race to come, the nuclear weapon, maybe they didn't want to, they knew someone as powerful as him. You know, Oppenheimer was Oppenheimer, but he, and in his own right, but he wasn't anything until the Manhattan Project.
Right.
That made him the father of the atomic bomb. Einstein was already Einstein before the Manhattan Project. This was Albert Einstein. So it could have been that as well, you know, just his opposition, which is funny. Tomorrow, August 2nd, is the anniversary of when Einstein wrote a letter to Roosevelt in 1939 warning of this arms race to come, Germany's eventual achievement of a nuclear bomb, that we need to build one of our own. And look how it turns out. He ends up being not involved with the project, and we know the rest of history.
Wow, that's very interesting.
And it makes sense. The whole arms race was against the Nazis at the time. So yeah, picking Einstein, who has a German background, we can be so skeptical of our own people on our own terrain. You know, how are we going to trust this German guy to help develop a weapon against his own people?
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. But I really want to talk about my favorite Einstein scene. See, what I really liked about his character is he kind of came in like this weird fairy godmother figure in the movie. He would just like show up. And so there's this scene where Strauss has Oppenheimer over his house. Einstein's been staying there, I guess, right? And has him there. And Strauss is telling him, oh, they don't want to renew your security clearance. You have to appeal. He breaks the bad news. He tells them about like the harrowing times Oppenheimer is going to have to face. Oppenheimer leaves his house so disheartened in the dark. And he's heading to his car, and out of fucking nowhere, Einstein comes out and has these words of wisdom. And we laughed so hard because I was like, where the fuck did he come from? He literally looked like he appeared out of thin air and plugged in his 2 cents. It was so cute.
I described it as his droopy dog moment because, you know, you see droopy dog in the cartoon and you run across town and you open a door and there's droopy dog.
Yeah, it just seemed like, you know, you would turn around, boom, he was there. I don't know. I thought he was adorable. And but the story that I love about Albert Einstein was how much he used to be, again, on his own frequency. He'd be thinking about all of these theories and everything. He didn't care about his appearance. He one time wore like a sweater with a giant hole in it because he just didn't care about little things like that.
Have you seen him in his fuzzy slippers?
Yes.
There's a picture of him in fuzzy slippers. He was a character. You know, there's a famous one with him sticking his tongue out, and you called him the
fairy godmother.
Fairy godmother, and he was the fairy godmother of that movie, and that's why he had to be in that movie. While he was not involved in the Manhattan Project at all, he was, in a sense, the fairy godmother to these scientists. All of these scientists looked up to Albert Einstein. That's why Oppenheimer kept going back to him. That's why he went to him with the formula, let me go to Albert. Because who the hell else are you going to go to? Who's smarter than Albert Einstein? I honestly don't know. If there's someone else, and someone can name someone at the time or still, you know, now maybe like, you know, there's people who are smart or whatever, but he was like their fairy godmother. So I love that they included him. I love the scenes that he had, and especially how his little, you know, conversation with Oppenheimer, and then how Strauss thought it was all about him the whole damn time.
I know, but that's a sign of a narcissist right there.
Exactly, someone egotistical.
And I want to point out that this moment, because again, I come from a mental health background. I like to feel like I have some expertise around the personality disorder area. And so when the moment where Strauss has that reporter challenging him at the end, and the reporter says to him, what if they never talked about you that day? What if they just had more important things to do? Right? And then when he opened the door, the force of the audio caused Robert Downey Jr. to go like this. And it is like literally a reaction you would see from a narcissist when you finally challenge them and tell them that they are not the center of the universe, that not every fucking conversation has to do with them. And it was such a subtle moment, but quite magical, I thought, in the filmmaking process.
Yeah, as soon as he opened that door, he was literally snapped out of his bubble, out of his little world where he was on top of the pedestal. I'm going to be in the cabinet position on Eisenhower's administration. Me. It was never about him, never would be about him, because Einstein was saying there's just more important things going on. And literally we learned that the important thing is the development of the nuclear bomb and the future of nuclear arms.
This is literally world-changing stuff. And the fact that he would just, think that he's just the most important thing going on is just a true identifier of a narcissist, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's very much the puppeteer finding out that he's also a puppet.
Yeah. He's got a hand up his ass.
Yes, exactly.
So what else have we got on here? Oh, the Manhattan Project. The issues of security at the Manhattan Project came up, and they actually had a spy that was there. Who was that spy?
That was, I just had his name. I can't pronounce it. It's like Cavalier, I believe his name was, or something. I want to get it for you. Not only did Oppenheimer have these connections with communism, but then they actually find a spy, and it was a person that Oppenheimer should have said something about, so it makes him look even worse. It's like, come on, bro, you should have said something.
Right.
But loyalty is important to Oppenheimer, and friendship, and he just didn't think. I would believe in that moment he wasn't thinking straight.
I've got the name.
You got him?
It's, it's a double A. So, Håkon Chevalier.
Yep, that's him.
So that lacks security. I found that to be astounding that was real. And what did Chevalier actually walk away with? If anybody knows how much information he was privy to?
That's a good question, actually, because they don't really get into it deep. From when I was looking into it yesterday, for example, they basically list everything that we see in the movie. Like, so everything online that I've read so far, it's like the same as the movie. It's the 1954 hearing, the Atomic Energy Commission, blah, blah, blah. You know what it is? Because they say he was a possible recruiter for Soviet intelligence. I think that they just never had, solid evidence. Because accusations were just enough. You could just accuse somebody. But with this guy, he was shady. I believe this was the gentleman who said he had a connection to, I believe he was talking to Oppenheimer at one point, and he said that he had a connection that we wanted to pass along some information of some sort, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, that was Chevalier.
That's a shady guy, yes. And I just think it was that. It might have been just that, and that's it. There was never they never probably found a Soviet agent who was controlling this guy or anything of that sort. They just had, a lot of hearsay and all that. But it was enough. It was enough because we saw Oppenheimer lose his security partly because of that.
Right. Well, I mean, McCarthy era, that's all you needed. Yeah. Not even that much.
Right. But it also, I think it speaks a little bit to his arrogance, Oppenheimer's, because maybe there was a trust factor. Maybe he just thought, there was loyalty was respected by all. If he valued it, other people valued it. But at the same time, people that are geniuses, sometimes, think that they make all the right decisions. And so he's probably everybody was hand selected by me. I know that I can trust this team. And I think it's, just being a little short-sighted.
I think, though, that comes with that level of intelligence, honestly. People like that who understand physics and making bombs and molecular. I don't know any of that crap. Math and that type of science are foreign languages to me. But to some people, it's like history is for me. It flows through them. It's their things. But I feel like those type of people something's going on a little bit different in their brains. So like you said, it could be maybe they're more arrogant, or maybe they just think they have everything covered, or whatever it may be. I don't know. I'm certainly not a psychiatrist. I barely passed psychology in college. I think that those people are just wired a little differently because of the enhanced intelligence that they have. So arrogance is definitely a great word to use in that example, because if he wasn't, he would have realized this and probably saved his own ass a little bit.
But I mean, it's also what made him so special.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
without that, you have to, like, sometimes even people who aren't that secure of themselves have to fake it till they make it. So they have to be like, I'm the best at this. I'm gonna do this, you know. And you have to sell yourself. So I think part of it is that.
And to kind of put a neat bow on this, how do you think Oppenheimer ultimately felt about his legacy? Like, did he ever make peace with the idea of what he had done and what it became once it was out of his hands?
For the rest of his life, I know that for the rest of his life, from 1945 to 1967, he struggled with it. He struggled with the power he created, the bomb. He struggled, but he still fought for, the nuclear restrictions and such. Even after he was stripped of his security clearance in 1954, he continued on. He stayed involved. But after the 1954, that whole situation, he was turned off, obviously. He knew that the government was against him. He knew that there were certain people out there that just didn't want to hear that talk of, let's not make any nuclear bombs, or let's put restrictions on it, or whatever that may be. But I personally don't think, just from what I've read, and whether it's letters or other works on him, I'm not sure if he ever fully came to terms with his creation and what he did. At some point, he had to come to terms with it because he made it. It happened. It was used. And as by 1967, he could see that where we were headed, especially with the activity of the early 60s with the Cuban Missile Crisis and almost going to war with Russia, which would have been a nuclear war. So he saw all this and he knew what was going on. But for someone like him, or anyone in general, when you create a weapon that can kill so many lives, even at the benefit of saving so many lives, you're still killing lives at the end of the day. And I would think that he suffered with that till the end. I would think, but I could be wrong on that. That's just my opinion.
I mean, I think people are rocked sometimes when they kill one person. You know, like, I can't even imagine, like, the death toll being hundreds of thousands of people. Apparently the numbers kept increasing over time, especially with radiation exposure, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that famous quote, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Was that from another source that Oppenheimer took, or was
I
that
believe
from him?
it was actually. It was some type of a literature he had. I believe also it might have been in, not that he got it from there, but there's a version of that in some type of religious text. I just can't remember which one at the moment. But yeah, he did get it from somewhere and then kind of adapted it later, like for himself, especially after making the bomb.
Mm-hmm. That's a hell of a legacy. A hell of an epitaph to put, at someone's burial. Yeah. So, what are we gonna rate this movie at?
I think it's obvious. Bananas. No.
I was thinking protons, because it's the protons that make the isotope of uranium.
But it's all about the kaboomies.
The kaboomies.
It's all about the kaboomies. How about kaboomies?
Like literally kaboomies. All right, we're going to do kaboomies.
Yeah, so our guest gets to go first. Out of 5 kaboomies, how many kaboomies would you give this?
Okay. I'm going to give it, I don't like to give anything 5, but it's close. So can I give it a 4.5?
Yeah.
You can give it whatever you want.
I'll give it a 4.5 kaboomies. I don't think it's a 5. There's very few things are 5 for me, so 4.5.
Okay. Because of the historical accuracy, the acting?
I enjoyed the acting. I enjoyed the casting. I enjoyed the visuals. I understand why it was so long. They could have cut here and there, but overall, I understand it. And historically, they kept to the script very well. So, that's why I give it 4.5.
Okay.
How about you, Chris?
For me, I am going to echo John.
Okay.
I thought that it lacked that je ne sais quoi that would push it to a 5, and I agree that 5s are exceedingly rare. But
it didn't make you cry.
It didn't make me cry.
No tears.
The acting was on point. I thought the story was riveting. The visual effects, the sound effects, everything was done at a very high level. It just didn't push it into that stellar territory for me, so 4.5. kaboomies.
Okay, I'm going to give this a 4. It's still a really good score. I thought the acting was good by Cillian Murphy, but I didn't think it was groundbreaking. I felt like he was actually kind of wooden, and maybe that was a little bit because that's how Oppenheimer was. I thought he was good, but he wasn't given a role that gave him a lot of dynamics. So I think he acted the hell out of the role he was given, but it wasn't like anything amazing. But I thought that cinematography-wise, this was amazing. Even just the backdrops of New Mexico were stellar. The audio, the soundtrack, all of those crisp details. There was one point where the soundtrack was playing a sound that was just going up my spine. It was like a shrill shriek of some kind. Everything that was done, even that the big bomb, when it met expectation, I thought. I love the women that were cast in this, especially Emily Blunt. I thought that she was an amazing person, that she might even be up for consideration for supporting Best Supporting Actress. And, you know, I'm not really a courtroom drama person, and that I did find this engaging, but I found that they were just introducing so many characters and so many little, like, you know, this document, that document, and this, like, so many little events that there were times where I was losing the thread and then having to pick it back up again. Because I couldn't keep all the names straight. So for me, that's why it dropped to a 4, because there was just a lot of detail that if I lost concentration for like 10 seconds or even looked at my phone, I would lose so much detail. And it was a very breakneck pace, I thought.
Oh, it was a turbulent pace.
Even from the beginning, even the more boring details of his life or romantic details were like boom, 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 boom. And so I found myself a little overwhelmed at times.
Yeah.
So, John, any closing comments on the movie?
No, overall, I thought it was a really good movie. I enjoyed it. I hope that they make more historical movies like this movie, like All Quiet on the Western Front. It's been a long time. Hollywood doesn't really like making historical movies very often. And when they do, it's like a lot of us historians cross our fingers, like, come on, be good, be good, be good. But so far, they did great with All Quiet on the Western Front. They did good with Oppenheimer, great with Oppenheimer. And I thought it was a really good movie, very interesting, and I hope people learn from it. If anything, people learn and just take the time to wonder, like, because a lot of people it's easy for people to say they shouldn't have dropped the bomb or they should have dropped the bomb. It's like, I hope people go out there honestly and just look up the numbers. Just look into it yourself. Like, I can give you numbers, but I'd rather people just look at the numbers and see how many people died from the 2 bombings versus what would have happened if we didn't bomb them and we took the next step, which was the invasion of Japan. And you'll see that the numbers, there's a big difference. I'll say that between the bombings and an invasion. So sometimes we have to do what we have to do at the end of the day, even though it sucks.
That's fair. Well, thank you so much, John, for joining us. And we're very pleased to be the first Den podcast to have you as a guest. That's the Deluxe Edition Network, fellow podcast. And please tell our listeners where they can find more of you and your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you again, guys, for having me. You're my first guest appearance on a podcast, so thank you.
We broke your cherry.
You guys popped my cherry, so I'm honored. Thank you. Your listeners, anyone interested, can find me on Instagram first and foremost at Hidden History Pod. I also have a website, hiddenhistorypod.com, and then I'm everywhere else: YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the major platforms. I'm available there, but Instagram is where I really keep it. I'm going to get New York now. Instagram is where I'm really popping. And at Hidden History Pod is where you can find me.
Awesome.
Thank you. This has been incredibly fun and educational, which is new for us.
Right?
I'm glad you guys were covering a movie that I could jump in on. And I hope in the future, any other historical movies you guys cover that you need some input, I'm here. And yeah.
Absolutely. When we see Barbenheimer, you're totally invited to come back.
And once you watch Barbie, I could just give you the history of the Barbie doll. That should be very interesting.
I already know about Ruth.
But thank you guys. Thank you. This was great, and I hope your listeners enjoyed this.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you, and we'll catch you again. So
definitely. Thank you both.
That'll do it for today's spoiler alert.